We'll reprise quickly the entire book and the 9 chapters, just so that we can be reminded of what we're doing on this soundscape. Each chapter has its very own characteristic, and this came about not just because of story, but because of Sunita's original design, where one of the things that became very evident was this text frame, where she picked up on different characterizations and treated each chapter separately. There's Paul's decorative border there, which is the oil paintings, but this is what we picked up on. We just felt that musically, colour is very important for you to work with. So we feel that this whole thing pulls together on that basis alone. Obviously, you've got very definite ideas, and we're not here to say how those ideas should morph. But we just quickly wanted to go through with you the chapters and how we're giving the chapters personality headings in a sense. So when we come to do the chapter headings for the final book, we know what they're about.
The colour theme led on to the illustrations being a theme to that colour, but also we then started to realise that the illustrations didn't necessarily always follow the storyline exactly. What happens, for example, especially in chapter 5, which we're working on at this very moment, is that the vignettes, although they're mentioned in the story, they start to take on a life of their own in a way, because they start to describe the elfin history in a way that the story doesn't go into. So we felt that that started to give the story extra depth. So it's also important that that element, as far as the story is concerned, was incorporated, but that's obviously going to affect, in some ways, what you do with the music. I'm sure that will affect it, because it does give the storyline a greater depth.
Yes, I would agree with that, actually,
Yeah.
Paul. I think the colour palette, if you like, will influence the tonal palette of the music.
Yeah.
So glacial blues, for instance, suggest to me, you know, certain tones, certain timbres of instrument, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I think the colours definitely do influence my thinking around the music. You know, although nothing's set in stone, but just I'm already picking up on, you know, how colour, the colour palette is going to influence what I do.
Well, it's interesting that, because it goes back the other way, because there's an artist called Doofy, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, and he actually said that he could create a painting or use colours in a way that you would actually recognise a tune. Now, I think that's possibly pushing it a little bit, but it's interesting that artists and musicians think along those lines, that colour has a sound and sound has a colour.
So chapter 1 is the text frame on that is gold or yellow, and the reason for that is that it is about Fizz and her imagination, which is the central human character in the story. When we come to chapter 2, which is where she meets Webstrand and the Swarm, we went with a cyan palette because the whole chapter set in moonlight in Fizz's bedroom. What Sunita's done now is that she's strengthened these text frames because of that, and the colours are now becoming even more obvious on the text frame themselves. You've talked about the ice blue for the crystal caverns, for instance, which come into chapter 3, which is the journey where she meets the Swarm. And again, you'll see Paul's vignette colour in there is this sort of ice blue, sort of lilac-y colour, isn't really, which is the night journey. So that's the journey to Shamistra. Now that chapter is the chapter that we're going to discuss in more detail today, is it not?
Yes.
On the music side of things.
So chapter 3, Paul, if you don't mind, if we maybe go through that
I would love to.
in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
Of course, nothing is set in stone yet, which is lovely. So what I've done so far is really just reread in a bit more depth chapter 3. I've read the whole story a couple of times through, and what I've done is just make a few notes for myself. What I've been trying to do is sort of summarise the main action and pick out what I think are maybe the salient points, words, sounds, atmosphere that might be useful to me in terms of creating music.
Yeah.
And then distill down from that in a bit more detail the kind of feel, the tone, timbre of different instruments perhaps that we might want to use to evoke ambience or create atmosphere or aspects of action. For instance, fizz is feeling fear, danger, happiness, whatever. Yeah. So that's sort of what I've done with my notes.
That's going into much more depth than I would expect. That's lovely. That's fantastic.
And I've done that just to try and help bed in the detail of the action of the story into my head, so that I can then start to just get some ideas. And like I said, nothing's set in stone. I've only been noodling, that word I use a lot. Noodling. Yes. I do a lot of noodling, which is just basically going to the piano and seeing what happens. And just, whatever suggests
just
itself.
Just by feel, in other words, really. It just comes out.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So I've got the keyboard here today, and I've brought along the accordion as well. There's maybe different instruments will obviously suggest are able to suggest different moods and different aspects. The keyboard, I will say at this stage, is not like the piano. I use the piano at home, the real acoustic piano. So what I'm playing or noodling around here today won't have the same resonance, so please ignore that. You don't get the same feel or touch,
no, I understand.
Tone or resonance on the keyboard, but it'll do for today because
gives a feel.
I couldn't get the piano in the back of the car.
That's a disappointment.
So would it be helpful to maybe just go through the notes that I've made, and I would like to get any further thoughts from you on anything.
If I can.
As Eileen was saying, at the end of chapter 2, Liz is in the bedroom and Webstrand has appeared, and the swarm is just appearing.
It's just arrived, yes.
So we've gone from what I've written here, sounds like rustling leaves.
Yes.
She floats up, gets her clothes on, and then the stairway opens and there's sort of sounds like rustling leaves. So that's what we're left with at the end of chapter 2, the Elphen Wings, yes. Yeah. Then starting chapter 3, and these are really just the things that have leapt out to me for things that are maybe important points. So we've got the swirling colours and the whirl of multicoloured wings. So I think that's a lovely sort of picture to start with in my mind. And their chatter between each other, and it's very much a chirping, chattery, happy sort of sound. And then they land down on the floor, and their chirping increases and lots of tiny giggles, and Webstrand introduces Fizz. That's a lovely opportunity for some nice sort of happy sounding stuff on the piano. Maybe up here somewhere. And something just kind of high, tinkly. Then Fizz notices the subtle colour variations, the soft pearlescent hues, the star gem crystals, the shimmering material of their wings, which is lovely. And then they leave. Webstrand puts the tooth into a jewelled pouch, the swarm rises, and Fizz then feels the vibrations of the many wings. So that again, it's quite a shimmery...
It's interesting, you see, how you're picking out things, because I think of this in terms of visual. I mean, the story came from a visual thing in the first place, because the words came from the visual images that I had, but now you're taking the story and you're reconverting it into sound, which is fascinating. You know, it's gone through it's gone through a metamorphosis really, from a visual to a written to back to music again, which is fascinating.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. Sorry, go on.
But as we said earlier, you know, about the colour palettes, and how that in turn is suggesting a tonal palette for me musically. It gives me lots of cues and just the feel that we're perhaps looking for in certain chapters, and throughout those chapters. And they're inside the starway, which is like glowing energy. So I've highlighted the words that for me are kind of embedding themselves, and then in pink here I've written perhaps the words that will more directly suggest music. So we've just had shimmering, we've got glowing. The accordion is really a good instrument for that, getting that shimmery sort of feel. If I could just let you have a wee bit of that.
This is fascinating. I mean, I've listened to you play the accordion, and I've never been this close to you when you've been playing it.
The piece that you used in the Watch and Wonder.
Yes. You allowed us to use for the Watch and Wonder card, yes, which was superb. It just fitted so well with the visual, really.
Well,
I know it wasn't made for the visual, but it did fit very well.
I'm so glad that it did. But what I wanted to say about that piece was that it was actually only accordion. That was built up on layers of accordion. I did play a tiny little bit of tin whistle, and there was a tiny little bit of vocal. But it was all accordion, and I started with just a drone, and I think I could perhaps use some of those ideas to create that shimmering sort of effect. So this particular accordion has got a big boomy organ-like sort of bass. So if I just let you hear. So on that piece that was in the Watch and Wonder, we started with that. I held that throughout the whole, that one chord through the whole thing, and then we added other bits of bass.
It's basically like the drone of the bagpipes, isn't it? You have the drone underneath, and then you have the
like that, yes.
On top. You sort of build up the layers. That's just like building up layers of paint.
There you go.
There's so many reactions to this. So go on. This is the underpainting.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a huge fan of drones, actually. I love drones in music because they underpin the rest of the music. And there's so much you can do just over one note, or well, I'm using a chord there. But over that you can build all kinds of other things. So that's what that piece was, and I think to get this sort of glowing, shimmery kind of effect, especially in this accordion, because it's an Italian accordion, it's got quite a big ringy sound, so you can get quite a nice shimmery, glistening sort of sound, if that makes any sense.
No,
so if I just let you hear. Fade out to nothing, bring it back in with the bells.
It's a much more delicate instrument, actually, isn't it?
Than people give it credit for.
That's right. That's what I was trying to.
It's a very versatile instrument.
Yeah.
I think you either love or hate accordions. And I do know some people who hate them, but
it depends. It depends what you're doing with them, I suppose.
I think it's a very versatile instrument, and even something like that, which basically I'm just sustaining chords there, but I think it can be so effective, and it's great for that sustain thing. You can have other things happening over that. Not that I think we're necessarily trying to tell the story in music.
No,
you know,
I know what you mean, but I think music is so important I mean, it's like any cinema music or what have you. If you have an image and you have a sound, the two interact with each other in a way it's not necessarily direct. But I mean, I know nothing about music in terms of making it, and you're talking about these layers, you know, and which is fascinating to me. But it's this. Well, I don't really know what I'm getting around to saying, but the way that a visual can work with music, that can both enhance each other. That's what I'm really getting around to, and I find it fascinating that there are links really to the build-up of the layers.
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of building up the sound, and that's exactly what musicians do. Likes of music in feature films, etc. It's sort of there to underpin the action, or enhance, highlight what's going on in the screen, but you're not telling the story with them, you're not attempting to do that. And I don't think that's what I would be attempting here, because you're already telling the story. And you know, it's there in the visuals. So really, the way I'm looking at it is really just ways of helping just create an ambience, an atmosphere.
Yeah.
Maybe the hints of the more emotional aspects.
Yeah. That's what it's important.
But not in any way, you know, intruding onto the. And particularly in the. You know, we were talking about the possibility of a video book, of you reading the story, and you know, if you were wanting that, perhaps each chapter, you know, bookended by music, you know, that might be a nice way of just helping set the scene, if you like.
Yes.
We were also thinking about the possibility of maybe a CD or a recording of the music based on the chapters. So there are 9 chapters, so maybe 9 tracks. But of course, nothing is set in stone at all.
To be honest,
yet.
you're giving it much more depth than I expected, which is wonderful.
But that's sort of where I'm coming from. I'm just taking my cues from the story and obviously the pictures. So. So we're in the starway, and it starts to be less sort of glowing and more crystalline. I love that word, crystalline, and glacial. Those words just immediately suggest things to me in terms of tonal qualities. The deepest blue, the most intense blue, the purity of the blue.
Well, I'm fascinated by blue, and I remember as a child once going inside a glacier.
Really?
There was a little tunnel inside a glacier, and the blue is that sort of magic blue that you almost, it's beyond imagination, you know, it's something that you almost haven't seen anywhere else.
Yes.
I know it's ridiculous because you think you've seen every colour, but inside a glacier, that blue is so intense and so deep, and yet you're almost in the dark. This light is filtering through, and it's this, you know.
Yes. Could you maybe? That is one of my favourites. I think it's stunning. I just keep looking at it and looking into it.
Well, all the way through this, I was thinking of that type, you know, the blue that I saw when I was. And I suppose when you see colours as a child, they are more intense anyway, because you haven't seen them that many times. But. That and to create that painting and to get that blue doesn't just come out of a tube. It has to be built up over layers and layers and layers, so that you have that depth of colour. It's glazing and glazing, and this is why really oil painting for these large paintings was really so important. The vignettes have oil painting too, but they're not built up in quite as many layers. But even when I was painting this, I became fascinated as those glazes were built and built. Some of these dark blues, how they started to sort of shimmer, even in the darks, they started to have that richness. And really, it's only oil paint that can do that.
Right.
Anyway, sorry, I'm going away from the music
No,
here.
not at all. That's fascinating to me because I'm not an artist, and
I'm not a musician. So.
so when I look at that picture, it's just stunning, because there's so much in it. So many tones of blue, and I'm not using great artistic language here, trying to describe.
Well, I think you respond to it. You respond to colour and you respond to painting. You can't always put those into words. In the same way, I can't put into words what you can put into music, and that's what you're saying basically. That the music will give it that extra depth. We can say the words that are in the text, and we can look at these pictures, but the music is another level, really, basically. And that's what's so important about adding the music to it, I think, all the way through.
Well, that's where I'm coming from anyway, Paul, trying to enhance, what's there.
Absolutely.
So the wonderful crystal hanging galleries. So the things, the words and the aspects in the story that were leaping out to me was the sense of the space, the sense of space, the cavern.
Yeah.
We've already spoken about the glacial ice blues and the purity, but also the pillars of crystal, the pulsating blue light. That's really fascinating for me, and the sound of air sizzling, the crystals reacting to the intrusion by Fizz and the elven swarm as they move through it. So it's not just a static. These aren't just static forms. They're interacting, which is fantastic. And again, what's leapt out at me: the blue fire on a pillar, the flickering tongue of plasma towards them with a crack. So, in my head, I'm imagining like a whiplash sort of almost coming out at them, so I think that suggests lots of musical possibilities. Each elfin has a bubble of resistance, and then there's a full plasma storm of tentacles from the crystal pillars, and the roar of the crystal's anger. And I love this next bit where the elven begin to sing by way of pacifying the crystals, and their beautiful song builds up as each elfin sort of takes it. So again, it's that building up.
Well, I was thinking in terms of these structures, and although they're heavy structures, because they're crystalline, I was thinking that sound could echo and vibrate among those, that they could almost be like tuning forks in a way.
Yes.
Massive as they are something which is transparent, something which is made of crystal. And so not only the space, but the fact that they are hanging, there's almost a bell-eye quality to that hanging.
I love that.
So all those things you're saying, and they have a resonance. That's basically what I'm trying to get around saying. They resonate all the time.
So the roar of the crystal anger, that we can use dissonant sounds if we wanted to try and suggest that. We can use discordant, slightly more dissonant sounds. When the elfin begin to sing and it starts to envelop the roar, which I think is a lovely idea, because there's the roar from the crystal cavern being affected by their intrusion, but then the elfin sounds envelop that and it becomes part of the song almost.
Something that's almost gentle, overwhelming, something which is very, very powerful. Yes.
If only the rest of life was like that.
That's very true.
But I really like the idea, and musically that could work really beautifully.
Fantastic.
So it's enveloped, and then what I was sort of starting to hear of the elven song, again, these are just three noodly ideas, was something between a lullaby or a lament, I think is what was in the story, which again is a lovely idea, that that those two are very close. The lullaby and the lament are very close in their feel. So it could be that if we were wanting to suggest the roar, do something dissonant and discordant, maybe quite rhythmic, but then use the same kind of time signature, but in a different way for the Elphen song. So just I mean, dissonant stuff, that's kind of fourths, the interval of a fourth is always quite good for, or, you know, stuff down there. The Elphen song, and I was just kind of noodling
So it's high in their level again, because every time you're talking about the Elphen, you're going to the chirpy sound again.
I am, aren't I? But what might be nice is just to start with single notes, so that you're just basically marking out the skeleton of the
This is how it
melody.
starts to come in, you mean, before it
Yes.
becomes more
So
powerful?
maybe is it Webstrand who starts singing? I think she does start singing, doesn't she?
I think she does, yes.
Yeah. So it might just be, for instance, single notes. It could just be. It might not even be on the piano. It might be vocally. We could build this up vocally as well, or you know, using different instruments.
Yeah. So this is interweaving with that sound that you're talking about. So that's going on, and then this is coming in.
It could do. I'm not suggesting we need to describe musically every single aspect. You know, I don't think we need to do that.
No,
I'm not even suggesting we need to necessarily do the dissonant storm, but you know, if we were, we can work
if it
the
works.
two together. So we could maybe just start just single notes, sort of. So you're basically kind of it's like if you imagine a skeleton, you're marking out the important points, but then you're adding more to the skeleton. So if we take that as a wee motif,
Yes.
and start adding to it.
Lovely, no. Keep playing. That was lovely.
Very rough.
That was lovely.
Of
I always envisaged this at this point, was that as the light becomes better, she starts to see this silver forest around her.
yes.
And as they're moving, because it's very still, their movement, their wing movements across that surface create a wake behind them. And that was always something which, you know, in my mind there was an image there. But it's a sort of a moving image, which again a static picture in some ways can't echo. You know, sort of a ripple across the surface as they move. I see that in my own head as they travel across this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe the music can help
well,
a little bit there.
Oh, perhaps it can. Yeah.
I was doing a wee bit of noodling about at home as well, and there's on my phone, which I've switched off because it's interfering with the amp. But there's a little piece which might suggest that sort of movement, the floatiness.
Put it back on for a moment.
Well, I can maybe just
Oh, you can do
try
that.
to
Okay, fine.
do something similar here.
Yeah.
Just using the black notes.
Yes.
which is a different using a different scale, so the pentatonic scale, which gives a completely different feel, and I love black notes, and not so much on the keyboard, of course, but on the piano, the black notes have a different, how can I describe it? A different sort of tone.
Yes.
And you know, I remember as a child, I used to just go up and down the piano, just when I was learning piano, just playing all the black notes because I loved the sound of them. I say you don't get the resonance on the keyboard, but on the piano you really feel it. So I tend to write a lot of songs in the flats, like E flat, A flat, which have a lot of black notes in the scale, which drives people who play instruments like, well, stringed instruments, fiddles, cellists, crazy because they're more difficult to play.
You're just trying to frustrate them, Lisa.
They're easy on the keyboard and the piano, because you've got all the notes laid out in front of you, just play them.
This will teach you.
But on a fiddle or a cello, it's perhaps not so easy.
Yes.
You know, just because you've got four strings, and you know you've got open tuning and whatnot, but so it's maybe not so easy to play in the flat keys. So in E flat, for instance, which has quite a few black notes, so quite often, for instance, in the band, I'll change something down from E flat to D because it hasn't got so many funny notes. But no, I think to suggest that kind of that floatiness, to suggest that wake, the movement, I think something on the black notes might work quite nicely. Just. That's just, and I think that the other nice thing about black notes is you can kind of play anything, not sound dog. I just love this. There's so much in this painting. I could just stare into it for so long. And you know, it's lovely because I'm hearing your wind chimes outside.
Yeah, affected by the wind chimes.
Which is beautiful. I love that.
The interesting thing about this painting is that as I painted it, I had to start to understand the forest because it's such an aerial view. And then I had to understand all the plants within it, all the various pieces of vegetation.
Yes.
And the painting, the large painting that I did of this, all around the edge of this, because it's a panel with some sort of wood backing on it, and all around the backing are the names of the plants as I started to recognise them. I know this sounds strange, and what they were. So the painting is actually a notebook of ideas. The whole book was like that in a way, that the images led, and then they got the imagination going.
Yes.
So this painting means a lot to me because while I was painting it, I was inhabiting the world really.
Yes.
And it was growing around me, you know, it was growing. I had an idea of the concept of looking down, but the valley and all the things that are in it evolved as I was painting it. It wasn't there to begin with. Nothing was there to begin with.
Chasm, the deep rift as they're flying along it.
Yeah.
And then they come to the nest.
The nest is sort of semi-opaque or semi-transparent. The light is shining through it. And I visualised these as almost lights floating in the sky, again because it is misty and they're coming out of the dark, and I wanted Fizz to see it from some distance away, not have any idea of its size, but just to see these lights and what is this strange shape. But I couldn't paint it that way because I suddenly realised that if I painted it that way, people wouldn't know what it was, because until they saw it, they wouldn't know what it was. So it was chicken and egg situation. What do you put first? So I thought I have to paint the nest so that you can see it. But I did then try and make it as soft as I possibly could. And it had to feel as if it was part animal, part vegetable, part structure. And then it wasn't until she got really very, very close that you would see that it was what Webstrand had said, the nest. And she only recognised that because she saw these tiny little elfin, and the tiny little elfin are along the bottom there. You can see some close by that are moving towards the nest, perhaps in front of Fizz. But these tiny little specks are the size of the elfin going in. Obviously Fizz, a human against those, would be slightly larger. But you can see that the nest is, certainly in terms of the elfin themselves, is quite a gigantic structure. And of course later when we go inside here and we travel up inside and we go to the various cells, which are almost like rooms or compartments or whatever, these are the living areas of the elfin. They're quite large in their own right, and Fizz can get inside of those. But the idea, as I say initially, was that you would see this very much as an alien thing, something which would be almost incomprehensible. So I don't know whether that helps, that idea of not, this distance, the darkness, the mist, and then slowly this thing resolving itself out of the mist and still being quite an alien structure.
It is so atmospheric and so it's just so evocative, everything you're saying. And I love the idea that the structure is sort of an indeterminate thing, at least to begin with. You're not quite sure, is this a kind of strange plant, or what? Is it, has it been created or built, or is it a creature? It's indeterminate.
Yeah. And remains
species
undeterminate in a way.
Yes,
and remains
yes.
indeterminate because even through the rest of the story it's indeterminate.
That's right, that's right. Because as we learn later in the story, it too responds to actions and commands and all kinds of things. But
it has a presence. We'll not go
it has a
into
presence.
that
We
yet.
won't give away too much as yet. So yes, I love that idea, and I love I love this painting, just the softness that you're talking about, how you've managed to convey that, the depth, and you see the tiny wee elfin figures going up there, but you've managed to create the sense of space and size and scale, and just the, I think musically as well, that is suggesting things. I'm just perhaps this sort of sound maybe sounds a wee bit cliched, and you might hear this kind of sound on, I don't know, Star Wars or something, but just this kind of sound that creates space, suggests space, and a softness. On the keyboard, for instance, we've got a ready-made string sound, so
right.
which isn't the real thing. But straight away it gives you the sense of space. Got the volume down really low because just to kind of give a very a soft, because otherwise it might come across as just too.
What I like
too strong,
about that is that there's a mystery about that, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a mystery about the sound,
Yeah.
which I like, and goes with that very well.
And of course the string sound on this keyboard is maybe not terribly authentic, but you could have the cello, for instance, or combination of other instruments that can create
Yes.
space, that
yeah.
feel of wow, just try and convey the feel of that painting. Likes of the cello, for instance, within just playing one long note, you don't just get one long note, you can get the vibrations, the resonance, harmonics, things happening within that
Wow.
note, which again, won't get in the keyboard to the same extent. So, you know, I think there are lots of musical possibilities.
What you've been saying today in a way has a link to painting, you know, because what you're saying here is you're saying this is like me using a sketchbook. Because when I'm trying to get ideas over, I'll put a sketch down. I say it's going to be nothing like this, and yeah, it's the only thing which gives the idea, and that idea to me is terrific. So.
Yes, that's
taking
exactly
beyond
it.
that.
Just a musical sketchbook, and now, you know, I've got these written notes here, but I've got other wee bits and bobs recorded on my phone. And again, they're just starting points, you know, just little things that suggest themselves, little motifs here and there that might be expanded on, chords, just little bits and bobs. And you know, we haven't decided yet, you know, in what way the music will be incorporated into, for instance, the video book. Or, you know, whether it's just for instance, at the start of a chapter, at the end of a chapter, or whether we decide to go for a CD of 9 tracks, one for each chapter.
I like all those ideas.
So do I.
Let's go for them all.
In terms of the video book, where you will be reading the story to camera, you know, music may not be so appropriate under your words or anything like that. Maybe just at the start and the end. I don't know. It's whatever you feel
it
yourself
might be
to
different. Well, that's something that we could discuss chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
I think, for example, in chapter 3, where you've been talking about the song, that would be important for it to come in possibly at that point, and perhaps even for me to stop talking at that point and to hear the music, so the music becomes, you know, just the descriptive part. I don't know, but I think that's something we have to
and
go in
maybe
chapter by chapter.
if we were doing a full recording with, for instance, 1 track for each chapter, that would certainly allow a lot more scope musically.